I live in Istanbul. I just took my daughter to go visit a friend of mine who's doing a posting in Berlin for 2 years, but he's been deploying in and out of Iraq since 2003. And we sit down together and have drinks later at night. Frequently, a theme is like, why am I still doing this? And so I think, these wars have been going on long enough now. And even folks who do 1 or 2 deployments, at a certain point, they raise their hand and say, hey, I want to go. And doubly so, the folks who wind up in the combat units, because you not only volunteer to join the military, you then volunteer to be, an infantryman. So, I do acknowledge the difference, but I actually think there's a lot more similarity than people often recognize.
Yeah, did you ever want to leave at the end? When you were there, did you want to go, or were you right where you wanted to be? Yeah.
I'm just going to be very blunt about my experience. When I was in combat or deployed, my biggest fear was that some big firefight would happen outside of the wire and I would not be there. I wanted to be there desperately. And when that did happen, and I really don't think I was alone in feeling this way, we would all kind of be tapping our feet being like, God, we missed that one. That's why you were there. You wanted to be close to it.
What's fucked up a little bit is like, I don't know what my life would have been if I'd made alternative choices, but I feel so at peace with myself and content in the choices I make and that I made, and I imagine Elliot feels much the same way. And there are a lot of people that come out of war with understanding themselves much better, understanding their place in the world, understanding the way they identify with people in society. It crystallizes certain things. They simply aren't the victims. In fact, they've been enhanced tremendously, and it's why war continues to be so seductive, because underpinning any kind of demonic and depraved war story is elements of this kind of triumph, and I've certainly experienced that, and it makes me sometimes uncomfortable as hell, because when things have gotten deeply real, as they have for me, and they have for friends, it shifts it, it alters it, but it doesn't rip it apart, And I wonder, maybe you feel similarly, Sebastian. Like, when Tim died, it changed things profoundly. But at the same time, do you regret everything that led up to that? Would you have made any other choices?
Yeah, I'll just answer that quickly, and I'll pass it to Jen. That's a tough one to answer, because I'm making a decision about something that wound up in someone else's death. But I can say I've been tremendously affected by war, and Tim's loss was enormous for me. And no, I wouldn't change a thing about my decisions. I was talking to a woman a few weeks ago who saw my final film, The Last Patrol, about the sort of struggle to come home for a couple of journalists and a couple of combat vets, and she caught up to me in the street outside the cinema and said, "Oh, I got to get my husband to see your film. He was drafted into Vietnam and he still misses it." So I think you can even be drafted, and when you're exposed to whatever that is about combat, it's not happening back home, and it's very, very possible to miss it. So actually, I don't actually think it's that relevant. Jen, what do you think?
I was just going to say that from outside of this experience, of being, in proximity of combat or death, that it made me think of Michael Herr's dispatches and his intent, and this idea that he was looking at his war photographs and he just wanted to go towards that to make them real. And what's so great about his book and his project is that he sort of goes all the way in, tries to sort of become like the soldier. And then what becomes most honest about the book, and it's telling, is the way he admits that that was sort of a failure in a way, and that it was artifice, and he was never really quite at that point where everything became real. And I think there's just sort of always that artifice that stands between, someone who's doing the reporting and the world around them. There's this idea of being a spectator, which you could potentially, argue happens with soldiers too, but I think it's even more, pronounced from the reporter's viewpoint. But it really makes me think about, just in terms of like, your role as a writer, your obligation as a writer at war. This quote that always disturbs me by Cynthia Ozick, which is, it's not sufficient to have beautiful thoughts while the barbarians rage on. And it just makes me feel like every time I produce something that it's, you know, what is it doing and how is it helping anyone? And I think that there's just a different relationship to that world if you're, you know, producing art versus coming back and trying to process it too for yourself.